What if some of Earth's largest and most mysterious creatures didn't simply vanish into the fossil record, but instead learned how to completely avoid us? Our planet is a vast and ancient place, holding dark, unexplored corners where the shadows play tricks on human eyes and human minds. For centuries, indigenous peoples across the towering Himalayas have whispered stories of a massive, bipedal creature stalking the snow-capped peaks and freezing valleys. Known in Tibetan folklore as the Yeti, this elusive figure is deeply woven into the spiritual and cultural fabric of isolated mountain communities. To Western explorers, it became the abominable snowman, a terrifying beast representing the ultimate unknown of the harsh, unforgiving, and unconquered alpine wilderness. But why do we so desperately want to believe that a giant, undiscovered hominid shares this modern, fully mapped, and satellite-monitored world with us? Part of the answer lies in our profound psychological need for wildness, a deep longing for mysteries that science has not yet systematically unraveled. The Himalayas, Earth's tallest mountain range, create the perfect atmospheric and geographical conditions for such a colossal mystery to survive and thrive undisturbed. Spanning thousands of miles of deep gorges and inaccessible glaciers, this extreme environment is perfectly suited for concealing large, solitary, and highly adapted animals. The local legends are not merely campfire tales. They are often functional warnings meant to keep vulnerable children away from dangerous, predator-filled forests. Yet, as early mountaineers began attempting to conquer Mount Everest in the early 20th century, these local myths suddenly collided with Western scientific curiosity. In 1921, British explorer Charles Howard Berry stumbled upon massive humanoid footprints in the high-altitude snow, sparking a global obsession that continues to this day. These tracks were not just vague impressions, they were enormous, deeply embedded, and seemed to stride across the glacier with a heavy, purposeful, bipedal gait. Decades later, in 1951, mountaineer Eric Shipton photographed a remarkably clear footprint next to an ice axe for scale, shocking the international scientific community. The photograph showed a foot that was roughly 13 inches long, featuring distinct, primate-like toes that defied immediate explanation by leading zoologists and biologists. Eyewitness accounts began pouring in from respected climbers, including Reinhold Messner, who claimed a terrifying encounter with a massive, dark creature in eastern Tibet. Messner, a highly credible and experienced mountaineer, spent years independently researching the creature, ultimately concluding it was likely a rare, undiscovered species of bear. But physical traces like mysterious hair samples, alleged bone fragments, and ancient mummified relics kept the possibility of an unknown primate tantalizingly alive. Monasteries in Nepal proudly displayed what they claimed were Yeti scalps and skeletal hands, treating them as sacred relics of a powerful, elusive mountain spirit. The sheer volume of tracks, sightings, and cultural artifacts demanded a rigorous response from the modern scientific world, pushing researchers into the freezing unknown. Modern science, however, demands more than stories and blurry photographs. It requires cold, hard genetic data extracted from the environment itself to prove existence. In recent years, researchers launched ambitious DNA studies, gathering hair, skin, and bone samples from across the Himalayan range to test for unknown primates. The results, published in major academic journals, were not the sensational discovery of a new hominid species that the world had so eagerly anticipated. Instead, the genetic signatures retrieved from these so-called Yeti relics consistently matched the DNA of known local mammals, most frequently various species of bears. It turns out that a brown bear, or a Tibetan blue bear, when standing on its hind legs, can easily mimic the silhouette of a human. When viewed through a haze of snow and mountain mist, our brains are hardwired to recognize humanoid shapes, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. This cognitive bias is a relic of our evolutionary past, designed to help us survive by identifying predators long before they could attack our ancestors. Seeing a face in a cloud or a figure in the shadows is not a sign of madness, but rather a hyperactive pattern recognition system. The mystery of the Yeti begins to look less like a biological reality and more like an intersection of biology, ecology, and human psychological projection. If a giant, unknown species truly lived in such a resource-scarce, high-altitude environment, it would need a viable population to sustain itself over millennia. Populations require territory, consistent food sources, and a social structure, all of which leave behind unmistakable traces that satellite imagery would likely have detected. Yet, the high-altitude regions of the Himalayas remain largely devoid of the necessary biological waste and structural modifications one would expect from such creatures. This leads us to a fascinating, quieter conclusion that the Yeti might not be one single animal, but a beautiful mosaic of misidentified wildlife. Nature is infinitely more inventive than our legends, and the actual animals of the Himalayas, the snow leopards and Himalayan bears, are survivors of extreme conditions. These creatures have evolved incredible physiological traits to thrive in environments where oxygen is thin, temperatures are brutal, and food is incredibly hard to find. When we search for a monster, we often overlook the genuine, awe-inspiring biological engineering that allows life to persist in the world's most hostile climates. Perhaps the true mystery is not why we cannot find the Yeti, but why we feel such a deep, primal emptiness when we find nothing. Our fascination with the unknown reflects a fundamental truth about our species. We are explorers by nature, constantly reaching for the boundaries of our knowledge. We inhabit a planet that has been largely mapped and measured, yet the psychological landscape of the wilderness remains an unconquered territory for our imagination. What happens when the maps are finally complete, and every square inch of the globe is under the watchful gaze of our sophisticated tracking technology? Beyond the snowy peaks of the Himalayas, human history is littered with accounts of creatures that defy our neat, academic categorization of the natural world. Consider the mapinguari of the Amazon rainforest, a giant, ground-dwelling sloth-like creature that local tribes describe with vivid, terrifyingly specific details. To the modern zoologist, it sounds like a fabrication, but to the paleontologist, it stirs memories of the Megatherium, a massive, extinct giant sloth. The Megatherium truly roamed South America during the Pleistocene, reaching the size of a modern elephant and weighing several tons before vanishing thousands of years ago. Is it possible that oral traditions passed down through millennia have preserved the memory of these extinct titans long after they were gone? Or, in the deep, impenetrable density of the Amazon basin, could a remnant population have persisted far longer than we ever dared to imagine? Science often views these legends with skepticism because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we have yet to produce a single living specimen. However, the history of biology is full of cryptids that turned out to be real, flesh and blood animals that simply hid in plain sight. The coelacanth, a prehistoric fish thought to have gone extinct alongside the dinosaurs, was famously rediscovered in 1938 off the coast of South Africa. This discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community, forcing us to admit that our maps of the Tree of Life were far from complete. It proved that large, distinct species can evade detection for vast stretches of time if their habitat remains sufficiently isolated and undisturbed by human industry. Yet, the jump from a deep-sea fish to a giant terrestrial mammal is immense, constrained by the harsh realities of energetics and population genetics. A creature the size of a mapinguari requires vast amounts of energy, creating a large metabolic footprint that would be difficult to conceal from modern sensors. Ecology teaches us that there is a finite limit to how many large predators or herbivores can exist in a given ecosystem without impacting the flora. The Amazon is a powerhouse of biodiversity, but it is also a highly competitive, resource-efficient system where every calorie is accounted for in the food chain. If such a giant were truly roaming the forest, we would expect to find its distinct tracks, scat, or at least the clear impact of its presence on vegetation. The lack of physical empirical evidence forces us to look elsewhere. Perhaps the truth is not in the biology, but in the anthropology of these legends. Stories of the mapinguari might represent a cultural defense mechanism against the dangers of the deep forest, personified as a singular, recognizable threat. By turning the forest's inherent, invisible dangers into a known creature, we make the overwhelming, chaotic wild feel slightly more manageable and understood. We project our own deepest fears and our most intense wonder onto the blank spaces of the map, populating them with monsters that reflect our own humanity. As we strip away the layers of myth, we often discover that the real world is far more bizarre than our most creative inventions. Throughout the 20th century, expeditions into the deepest reaches of the Congo Basin sought evidence of the Mokele Mbembe, a legendary dinosaur-like creature. Local inhabitants described a long-necked, swamp-dwelling beast that matched the physical description of a sauropod, a group that died out 66 million years ago. It is an intoxicating idea, a living time capsule, an organism that bypassed the Great Extinction event to survive into the modern age. Yet, when researchers applied the same scientific rigor used for the Yeti, the evidence for Mokele Mbembe faded into the tropical humidity. Expeditions led by zoologists and explorers returned with plenty of fascinating environmental data, but zero concrete evidence of a surviving giant reptile. The environment of the Congo, while incredibly dense, is constantly being surveyed for logging, resource extraction, and conservation monitoring. A dinosaur-sized herbivore would fundamentally alter the structure of the forest canopy and local riverbanks in ways that satellite imagery simply cannot miss. So why do these specific prehistoric monster myths persist so stubbornly, transcending borders and generations across completely different continents? Perhaps it is because our modern, clinical understanding of extinction feels strangely insufficient to explain the sheer scale of life that has existed on Earth. We are living in a sliver of deep time, a brief moment where humans dominate the surface, yet we struggle to accept how much has been lost. The idea of the Mokele Mbembe is a psychological comfort. It implies that the past is not truly dead, but merely hidden from our sight. It allows us to believe that the world is still large enough to harbor miracles, that our scientific maps are just imperfect, incomplete drafts. But there is an even more humbling reality. The Earth has been home to millions of species, the vast majority of which are gone forever. We find their stories written in the stones and the ancient DNA, a silent, complex narrative of evolution, catastrophe, and constant, relentless adaptation. When we chase cryptids, we are really chasing the ghost of the wild that we have systematically pushed to the margins of our world. We are afraid of a world that is fully accounted for, a world where there is no room left for the unknown, the impossible, or the magical. The real tragedy is not that the Mokele Mbembe isn't out there, but that we have lost so much of the actual, verified, and awe-inspiring megafauna. We live in a world of declining biodiversity, where the real, documented animals are disappearing faster than we can name them or understand them. The mystery of the cryptid acts as a mirror, showing us how desperate we are to keep the magic of nature alive in a world we have engineered. Perhaps the most profound lesson from our search for hidden monsters is that our capacity for wonder is not something we should ever outgrow. Whether we find the Yeti or simply find a better understanding of the bears that share our mountains, the journey itself changes us. It forces us to confront the boundaries of what we believe to be true and to appreciate the sheer complexity of the natural world. We live on a planet that is still surprising us daily every year. Thousands of new species are identified, from microscopic bacteria to complex vertebrates. Our scientific curiosity is not a tool to kill mystery, but rather the most powerful instrument we have to uncover the mysteries that actually exist. We should not fear the total mapping of our world. Instead, we should see it as the beginning of a deeper, more intimate conversation with nature. Once we understand the mechanics of our own cognition, our pareidolia, our pattern recognition, our deep-seated need for folklore, we can start to look at nature clearly. We can appreciate the beauty of a mountain not because of a monster that might live there, but because of the mountain itself, in all its silent, glacial glory. The wilderness is not a place for us to project our own insecurities, but a place for us to learn how to exist responsibly within a greater system. If we continue to treat nature as a backdrop for our stories rather than a partner in our survival, we risk losing the very thing we seek to protect. The next time you find yourself wondering what might be lurking in the dark, remember that you are part of a species that has always looked at the stars. We are the stewards of this strange, vibrant, and increasingly fragile blue planet, and our responsibility is to protect the actual life that we times know times is there. The real giants are the forests, the oceans, and the intricate ecosystems that support our entire existence. They are the true mysteries waiting to be explored. We have the technology, the resources, and the intelligence to turn our curiosity into action, shifting our focus from the impossible to the essential. Perhaps the greatest discovery we can make is not finding a mythical creature, but rediscovering our role as a species that honors, understands, and preserves the living world. As the maps fill in and the shadows retreat, we are left not with less, but with more. More responsibility, more appreciation, and more reasons to protect the wild. The unknown will always be with us, waiting in the vastness of the cosmos, within the depths of our own biology, and in the complexities of our future. So continue to look, continue to wonder, and continue to search, but do it with your eyes open to the magnificent, fragile reality right in front of you. Because in the end, we are all just travelers on a tiny, beautiful rock trying to make sense of a universe that is far more wondrous than any legend. What amazing stories will you tell about the world when you finally look at it exactly as it is?